Whenever we read the scriptures, whenever we pray with the scriptures, there's not a single detail that should escape us. Every single word is infused with meaning and should be a marker for us to help guide our prayer and guide our encounter with the Lord and what he longs to reveal to us. And especially in the Gospels and in John's Gospel, places, names, and times are of utter importance. So we should pay attention whenever we see a place named, we hear someone's name or the lack of a name, and we hear about a time of day. Our ears should perk up and we should pay attention. The gospel begins today that Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives. We've heard of the Mount of Olives. In John's Gospel, the Mount of Olives is only mentioned one other place, and that's when Jesus enters into his passion, when Jesus is at the Garden of Gethsemane, which is at the foot of the Mount of Olives, where the weight of the world is upon him, when the shame of the world is presented to him, when he is suffering so deeply because of what he is about to undergo and enter into, that he is sweating blood, that he is in tears. His disciples, whom he loved, whom he spent 3 years with, whom he knew intimately and they knew him, they saw him perform these miracles, they saw him heal people, they heard him speak these words of everlasting life, and their hearts were moved and changed, are now asleep. They're missing the picture, and Jesus is suffering the shame and the weight of the world alone. And he says, "Father, if it is your will, take this cup from me, but not my will, yours be done." We hear of another garden in the scriptures, the Garden of Eden, where sin and shame enters into the world through the act of Adam and Eve, where after falling and eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they are ashamed of each other, ashamed of their own bodies. They have to hide their bodies from each other and hide their bodies from God. This morning in the Mount of Olives, we also hear of the evening in the garden where God was walking and they hid themselves. We know of another garden, the garden on the morning of the third day when Mary Magdalene encountered the risen Lord, when she was weeping there at the tomb, whom she saw him and she thought, that's not Jesus, that's the gardener. Right? And I've probably killed the gardening metaphor lately, but there's something so interesting that she thought that Jesus was the gardener. There's something so intimate about that image of how she saw her Lord. Right? The gardener is the one who has his hands in the soil, who is caring and tending his orchard. Right? We heard recently the parable of the vine dresser, that the Father is the owner of the vineyard, and Jesus is the vine dresser who bargains with his Father, says, don't destroy this plant that's not flowering. I know there's no fruit on this tree, but don't destroy it. Allow me to tend it. Allow me to prune it so new fruits may come forth. Allow me to till that soil, to take all that has died and fallen off and turn that into that compost which is rich and will bring new life. That Jesus is so intimate, and Mary knew this in her own life. She had been freed from possession by the hand of Jesus. Her life had been given meaning and new purpose. She knew the touch of the gardener, and so it's very interesting that she confused Jesus with the gardener at first. And ultimately, we know of the other garden that took place before that, the Garden of Calvary, where the shame of the world was upon this man. Names are important, but also the lack of names. Right? We know throughout scriptures, we understand that Jesus established Peter as the rock of the church. You are Peter, and upon this rock, Cephas, I will build my church. We know that Peter is listed as first among the apostles every time we see a lineage of the apostles, because he was recognized as the first among equals, the leader of the new church, the leader of the Christian family. We also see that Mary Magdalene's name is placed first amongst the women who followed Jesus, because of her role as the apostle to the apostles. Right? So names are important. But we see in today's gospel, this woman is unnamed. So that's intentional, because that woman is you and I. I am that woman, and you are that woman. Whenever we read the scriptures, the gospels, and we pray with them, we can use our imagination. God has given us imaginative powers. So if you are of the ilk of having a vivid imagination, then place yourself in this scene, that you are that woman, and replace that word adultery with whatever is your biggest shame. What's your shame? Maybe you struggle with an addiction. Maybe you have problems with drinking too much. Maybe you have problems with money or gambling or spending too much. Maybe you do have problems with adultery and lust and infidelity. Maybe you have problems of pride or of deep anger. What is your deepest shame? Imagine that shame is brought before the Lord, laid bare before all to see. Again, we see that this place of the temple, that Jesus moves from the Mount of Olives, maybe meditating upon the shame that he is about to bring upon himself, the shame of the world, and he enters into the temple, the place of worship, the place where sacrifices were made, where things that were old and dead were sacrificed and became new through the old covenant. And so when Jesus enters into the temple to teach, and this woman's shame is brought before him, imagine this. Imagine this scene where shame enters into the temple, and Jesus, who is the Holy of Holies, we hear on Good Friday when at the hour of the crucifixion that there was an earthquake, and the curtain in the temple, this thick cloth-bound 6-inch thick curtain, was torn asunder from top to bottom in a way of symbolizing that the Holy of Holies that only the high priest could enter into at certain times of the year had now been broken open and spilling out into the world through the actions of Jesus on the cross. That shame and death no longer have the final word over us, that the Holy of Holies is coming out to meet you and I in the midst of our places of sin, of death, and of shame. Jesus, the Holy of Holies, comes to this woman. He bends down to her level, which is unheard of in this time, for a man to even be alone with a woman, to talk to her, but to bend down to her level, to look her in the eyes. And right, we don't know what he was writing on the ground. That's always a question that biblicists and theologians have always had. Right? Maybe he was writing the sins of these people who were accusing her. And he doesn't even look at them. He's down at her level. He says, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She says, "No." He says, "Neither do I. Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore." So yes, this acknowledgement that we should turn from sin is true, absolutely. But Jesus doesn't condemn her in the midst of her shame. He stoops down to her level. He heals her. He gives her new purpose. He could have scrutinized her. He could have asked her, is what they're saying true? Present me your evidence to show me that you are not guilty of this crime. He doesn't do that. He bypasses all of that. He's not worried about the details. He's worried about the person. He's worried about her heart. He wants to take away her shame and to give her newness of life. How is Jesus meeting us one-on-one, stooping down to be with you, to look into your eyes, to be the gardener that tills the soil of your heart in the midst of the place of your deepest shame? The Holy of Holies is coming to us anytime we call upon him, anytime our shame is presented either by others or by ourselves for the world to see. "Behold, I am doing something new. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? In the desert I make a way. In the wasteland I make rivers. Wild beasts honor me, jackals and ostriches. For I put water into the desert and rivers into the wasteland for my chosen people, for you and I to drink, the people whom I have formed for myself." How are we encountering Jesus in the midst of our shame? How are we allowing him to touch us, to mold our hearts, and to make all things new.